Have I ever mentioned how great of a binge Mushoku Tensei is going to be when it's finished? Because this week is a prime example of the kind of episode you watch, you enjoy it all the way through, and then by the end you're like, I want to immediately jump into the next one. Unfortunately, we only have one more episode until the 3-month wait for the second half of this season begins. Hello everybody, I am Phenom Sage, and welcome back to another Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation review, and today we're going to be talking about Episode 10, The Value of a Life and the First Job. And that's kind of a literal interpretation of everything that happened this episode, but man, was it just so good. I don't know what the general opinion of this episode is going to be. I saw some people on the Discord a little bit more meh on it, but for me, I loved it, man, and there's really no other place to start than the highlight of the entire episode, the scene near the end where Rudeus, Eris, and Rudeus confront these animal smugglers who hide them in order to claim this petty reward, and I really wasn't sure where the story was going with this plotline, so when it happens, when Rudeus just beheads this dude in cold blood right in front of Eris and Rudeus, I was feeling the exact same emotions that Rudeus was in this moment. I was shocked. I was kind of bewildered. It's not like I didn't expect Rudeus to be capable of this kind of act, but it just felt so unnecessary and so over the top, and I really do feel like they communicated the emotions of this scene really well, and more important, the way that it characterizes every single person in our main group so efficiently, so effectively. I want to start out with Rudeus, because for those who have even the slightest memory of past episodes, there was a very similar scene to this one in episode 5 when Ghislaine murders the dudes who kidnapped both Rudeus and Eris, and I even commented about this in my review where they deliberately show Rudeus coming face to face with death and the realization that this world is so much more cruel and inhumane than what he's used to. I mean, you have to really keep in mind that for essentially the entire series, even after he's been reincarnated into this world, he's lived a very sheltered life. The incident with Ghislaine is the only time he's had to see the darker and more violent side of people in this world, and so this is the second time he's witnessed it, and in contrast to the Ghislaine scene where he just cowered about it and moved on, in this episode he has to take on the responsibility of teaching Rudeus that this is not how people should be living their lives. He uses the reasoning that it will just ruin the spirit's reputation even more, but I think Rudeus really just doesn't want to see any more death. He is adamant about not killing people, even evil people, and it's such an interesting contrast to this otherwise really flawed, obscene character we've known up to this point. It makes me wonder if there's anything deeper to that opposal to killing, because we see in this episode that Rudeus is quick-witted, he's clever, he's willing to use anything he can to his advantage to reach his goals. I mean, we even have the dude we killed's party essentially hostage so that way they can take on these higher level jobs, and yet despite that, I'm sure if there was ever a time where killing someone, even just this terrible, miserable excuse for a person, Rudeus would be firmly against it, and I don't know, man. I just find that a really interesting facet to his character that I'm sure is going to come up in some moral and ethical dilemmas in the future. Rudeus's ideology there clashes nicely against Rudeus, who both wants to protect children and hates all evil, both of those coming from his past and his backstory that we learned last episode. But despite that though, I find his reasoning here a lot weaker and a lot more hypocritical compared to Rudeus, and I think that's probably what they were going for, since even Eris calls him out on it and talks about how he's had tolerance to these things that he's decrying right now. He's had tolerance for them in the past and only cares now because it's happening to a child. To him, anybody who would hurt a child is unquestionably evil, even though these dudes who were smuggling animals were honestly just petty lowlifes. They did not deserve to get killed or held hostage over it. The person's characterization that I found arguably just as interesting as Rudeus in all of this was Eris, man. And again, we go back to that episode 5 encounter with Ghislaine, and I commented on this exact thing, and they're bringing even more attention to it this time, that Eris does not care. I don't know what has happened in her life to desensitize her to murder and violence, but just like in episode 5, she does not even bat an eye at seeing this dude get beheaded right in front of her. In fact, the only thing that even gives her any reaction in this scene is Rudeus arguing with Rudeus and telling him he shouldn't be causing problems for Rudeus, and that ties into the larger picture of Eris and Rudeus' relationship this week. It's very clearly developing and progressing, and we see her more protective, more defensive, and more caring about Rudeus than she ever has been in the past. She gets furious and lapses back into that violent mad dog state when her clothes that Rudeus bought her get damaged. She argues with Rudeus and even straight up just tells him to leave the party if he's going to make problems for Rudeus. It's kind of bordering on this straight up devotion, and while I do still think it's incredibly endearing, it's incredibly sweet, and I'm loving their relationship, I'm starting to see these little seeds planted that could end up growing into a more unhealthy or even toxic dynamic, and I'm really curious if they would ever go that route with them in the future. All of that being said, we did get a really good scene with Eris and Rudeus this episode when they're staying the night at the inn, and I love that despite the fact that Eris has been so upfront and adventurous and excited about being in this foreign land and having to live like adventurers, which by the way is a great callback to her being so excited and interested when Ghislaine is talking about her own adventuring stories. Despite all of that, she's still a kid at the end of the day, and you see that apprehension and nervousness poke through for the first time when she asks Rudeus, "Are we going to be able to make it back home?" It's such a simple and short scene, and yet for me it was so valuable in still showing her character flaws and showing these other sides to her personality that aren't as immediately apparent. One thing I did really want to highlight about this week though, and I know this is beating a dead horse, I know I've mentioned this like at least in half of all of my episode reviews, but just the world building, man, the atmosphere, the environment, the setting, it's all so perfectly done in a way that really speaks to me as a lover of fantasy and a lover of fiction in general, really. This is the kind of adaptation and portrayal of fictional settings that makes fantasy come alive. Somehow, we go even more outlandish than last week in the city of Rikarisu, a city of all kinds of tribes of demons that look like animals and more traditional ogres, and I don't know, man, I guess demons can just look any kind of way they want. And the way this city is brought to life, the architecture of stone and clay, the beams of light that turn on in the night, the weird pillar of metal or gem in the middle of the city, the fact that Studio Bind is going 100% in with this fictional demon language the entire episode with every single character, it's unbelievable, man. They're so committed to this world, and it only makes me even more excited to see what other fictional locations this world has in store, and on top of that, how Studio Bind is going to adapt them. The last thing I really wanted to talk about in this episode is Man God. He's back way sooner than I expected him to be, and I'm starting to wonder what his role in the story will actually be at the end of the day, because part of me doesn't really like having this Deus Ex God telling Rudeus exactly what he needs to do in any given situation, but I also don't really know what the deal with this guy is, so I'm going to reserve my judgment on that until we get more answers. The biggest question I have is why only now is this guy consistently talking to Rudeus? Why is it only after he's been transported to this demon continent that he shows himself? Is it because Rudeus is in most need of help right now? Or is he deliberately trying to lead Rudeus to some kind of objective? I don't know, man. There are a lot of secrets in store, and I'm guessing we're not going to get the answers to them for a very long time. That's been all from me, though, for another banger episode of Mushoku Tensei. Get hyped for the finale of Core 1 next week. Let me know in the comments what you thought of this episode, and if you want to talk about it with me and other cool people even further, you can join my Discord community in the description below. You can also follow me on Twitter and subscribe for the future Mushoku Tensei reviews every single week. I love you, thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.